Hey guys, hi everyone, good evening. Hello guys, hi everyone, good evening, good evening. Good evening Pramod, good evening Ankit. Walaikum salam Faisal, good evening guys. So for attendance, I'll be sharing a Google form later on. Good evening Isha, Anurag, Pradnya, Ankit, Ayush. Good evening guys, good evening. So give me a quick confirmation whether I am audible as well as visible. I guess you might be hearing some background noise. Hopefully not. Good evening, Kasim. Walaikum salam. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. So please give me a quick confirmation whether there is any noise, background noise, and am I audible as well as visible before we start with our session. Quickly. Yes, sir, you are audible. Perfect. Great. Is there any noise? No, sir, you are good. Perfect. Little bit. So I think for today's session, we can manage a little bit of noise, right? So as I said in the orientation session, that I will be traveling for a few days, and that's why I am currently not at home. I'm in a rent room right now, and for these 2 days, unfortunately, there's some construction going on around this house, and for that reason, there might be some background noise. But we will try our best to avoid this background noise, and let's manage for these 2 sessions only. And from next week, definitely, I will be shifting to a proper accommodation. I will be in one of the hostels of one of the universities, and from there, definitely, we will have our classes properly. So for today, I request all of you to manage it a little bit, and I guess we can start. Shall we start, guys? I'm definitely expecting more students to join. As of now, there are only 50 students here. And according to the poll that we launched, I'm expecting more than 100 students to be in the class. Related to the attendance, in between any time, I'm going to share a Google form with help of which I will actually, ask you to submit your attendance, and then that's how I'm going to monitor your attendance and ask you to submit your attendance. Perfect. I guess we can start with our session. So shall we start? Perfect. Let's start. See, it's very important for us to understand before we talk about anything that what we are here to discuss, right? So we are going to start our backend from today. Although from tomorrow, because today's classes we are going to understand the prerequisites of our backend. Now, when we talk about prerequisites, what does that exactly mean? First of all, let's understand one very important thing, which is that, sir, I am first time here. I don't know anything about front end. I don't know anything about JavaScript. So how can I start my backend directly? The answer to that, I will try to explain it in multiple steps. First of all, there are two types of developers. Let's try to understand one very important thing over here. What are we trying to accomplish over here? See, we are trying to understand how a website works. How, whenever we try to create any website, what are the different things that we need to keep in our mind in order to become a complete developer who can take care of both front end as well as back end of a website, right? Now, when we talk about this whole part of the website, it's called full stack web development. And we have discussed in orientation session as well. Then when we talk about full stack, it consists of two things. Number one is called front end. Number two is called back end. Now, what does front end actually mean? Whenever you go to your website, any website, let's suppose I am going and I am trying to access any website, let's suppose Amazon.in. Now, over here, when we go to Amazon.in, what does it give us back? That's first thing. It gives us a complete response. And if you look at this response, it consists of buttons, it consists of images, it consists of these animations, it consists of colors, it consists of proper layout, XYZ things. But most importantly, you need to understand that this part of a website is that part of a website with which a common user like you and me can properly interact. So that part of a website with which a proper common user can interact is called front end. So simply, front end, in order to create front end, we have three things that we need to learn. Number one is called HTML. Number two is called CSS. Number three is called JavaScript. Now, I'm not going to go into what HTML does, what CSS does, what JavaScript does. You will have to learn that on your own. But over here, as I said, we are here to start backend. Now, we know in order to create the front end, this is what you are supposed to learn. But for backend, what are the prerequisites? What are we supposed to learn? The full stack that we are over here talking about is MERN. Now, in this entire MERN, M stands for MongoDB, right? It's a database. E stands for Express, a framework of Node.js. Then we have R. In front end, it's called React. Then N, it's called Node.js. You don't have to join from any website. As of now, we will use only Google Form for the add-in stage. So don't worry about that. Now, in order to learn MongoDB, in order to learn Express, or in order to learn Node.js, there's one thing common among all of these, and that is your JavaScript. Now, when we talk about JavaScript, JavaScript can be divided into two parts, although it's only one part. But when we talk about from the learning perspective, we can learn JavaScript from two ways. Number one is learning JavaScript for the sake of front end. Number two is learning JavaScript for the sake of backend. In front end, we use proper document object model, which you don't have to understand at this point of time, or whatever we does in the front end, we have already done that. You don't have to worry it. But over here in the back end, we need to understand a little bit of JavaScript before we talk about the real concepts in backend. We need to understand JavaScript as a programming language first. We know that when we talk about our computers understand programming languages, right? And JavaScript is one of the programming language. Now, can anyone tell me what do we mean by programming language in the chat? Give a proper definition in the chat. When we talk about JavaScript, it's a programming language. As of now, it simply does two things for us. As I said, we will use it for front end as well as we will use it for back end. Front end part is already done, but for back end, how much of JavaScript we should actually know? If you ask me, I would say everything. But there are some limited topics that I will teach you for today, which you have to properly understand in today's class, and it will definitely help you understanding backend properly. So let's start with the basic concept over here of JavaScript. See, when we talk about a programming language, it's a language with help of which we give instructions to a computer in order to solve a problem. The agenda is we are trying to solve a problem. What problem does my Amazon solve, by the way? What problem does my Amazon.in solve? It solves my online shopping problem. I want to shop from home. Similarly, what problem Facebook.com solves? It solves that I am able to send a message, communicate with any person from home, that to anywhere in the world. So we have this programming language. The agenda is very simple. We want to solve a particular problem, right? Now, in order to solve this problem, we use programming language. Now, since it's a language, what does that mean? That means it will actually have proper syntax, it will have proper semantics, right? English is a language. So, what is English? English is a language which has its own rules, its own grammar, its own syntax, its own semantics. Similarly, when we talk about JavaScript over there, at this point of time, it will have its own semantics. But some of you might ask, sir, you did not give us the definition of JavaScript. I'm keeping that as of now up to myself right now, because I don't want you to understand at this point of time the definition. There are some jargons that I might use in JavaScript. That's why I don't want to confuse you. Let's talk about a very basic example. Okay, before we talk about any syntax, before we talk about a concept in JavaScript which is a prerequisite of backend, let's understand one thing. Remember, I talked about that when I go to any website, I write a proper domain over here in the URL. And when I click enter over there, it actually returns me a response in the browser. And I told you that response is nothing but collection of three things. Number one is HTML. Number two is CSS. Number three is JavaScript. Now, when we talk about our HTML, what does HTML do? It's a markup language. The full form of HTML is it is hypertext markup language, right? Which means that HTML is not a programming language, it's a markup language. What does markup language mean? Markup languages are those languages with help of which we can format text and our images. Don't you think when you go to your website over there, your text is properly formatted, your image is properly formatted? So when you talk about creating the structure and placing it on the websites, getting buttons, getting text, getting images, getting videos, getting media, and placing it properly on the website, formatting it, for that particular reason, we use one of the very important markup language, which is HTML. Now, before I move forward and talk about CSS, one very important thing. If you want to understand backend properly, make sure you take notes properly, especially to those students who are learning web development first time. Take notes properly. If you need any notes for front end, we already have few students who have taken the notes for all front end. We will ask them to share that with you in our group. Now, when we talk about our HTML, with help of this, what is the agenda that we want to format our text? Now, when we talk about CSS, what does it do? It simply makes sure that the content you got up on the website, the buttons, the images, the text, with help of HTML, I will be able to style it properly. So the coloring of that particular content, making sure its appearance properly makes sense, making sure we have a proper layout. So the design of this website, of this content which I created with help of HTML, all that is done because of a format called as CSS, which is nothing but cascading style sheets. Now remember one very important point. We can create wonderfully a website with help of HTML, with help of CSS, right? And when we do that, such kind of websites are called static websites. So we have, whenever we define or create a website with help of HTML and CSS, they are static. What does static mean? That once you open that website in a browser, throughout the time after that, they will be constant. There won't be any change. There won't be any interactivity. And when we say interactivity, what does interactivity of a website mean? That my website will not respond to the actions of a user. For example, you go over here to a website. When you simply go over here and try to search something, it means my website is responding to what I type, right? Now, this is interactivity, this is dynamicality. And without adding a proper logic to our website, we cannot add interactivity in a website. So when we say logic, what does that mean? That means we have to make sure that we will include a programming language. And have we been using any programming language over here? Of course not. It's a markup language and it's a simple format with the help of which we can design our application. So it means to add interactivity, to add dynamicality inside our website, we have to make sure that we will use a logical language, and that is our JavaScript. That is why we say when we actually implement HTML plus CSS and then include JavaScript in it, the websites that will be the outcome of it are called dynamic websites. So in interview, if anyone asks you, hey, why do we use JavaScript in our web development? The first answer should be in order to include interactivity. But that is from the perspective of front end, right? From the perspective of making sure that in my website, I am trying to add interactivity. But JavaScript is not just that. We have to make sure that JavaScript as a programming language can be also used to write our server side logic. Now, when we say server side logic, it means that it should know how to create a server and make sure that server is properly functional. Make sure this server knows that when anything comes from the front end, how to process it and then send the response. So it means we are not just going to use JavaScript to add dynamicality, but also make sure that whatever our server side logic of that website is, we will properly use it. So over here, we need to make sure that we will use JavaScript for the server side rendering. I hope this makes sense, right? Now, what does that actually mean? Let's go a little bit down over here. Now let's try to understand that our agenda for today's class is we understand JavaScript from the perspective of programming language. Now, when we say programming language, as I said, every programming language has proper syntax, has proper semantics, right? Let's talk about a simple example of a website. We have a website, right? And over here, I have an input field in which I am expecting user to type email. Done. Then I have another input field in which I am expecting that user will type password. Done. Then I have a button over there that simply says login. Now, what is the working of this particular web page? You have seen login pages in every single website, Amazon, Facebook, lot of websites, right? Now, as a common user, I will simply go to this website, write my email, whatever my email is. Then I will simply go write my password. Now, when I click on login, what should exactly happen? If we talk about in common terms, we can simply say that when I click on login, maybe there is somewhere a database, a storage, in which I will simply see if this email for any user exists or not. Then I will check if this email exists. Check its password field and please compare this password with the password. If both are correct in that particular case, allow the login and simply go and give me the other resource of the website. But don't you think all of this is in this whole scenario of this web page simply and simply means I am talking about the server side logic, something that's happening behind the scenes, something that a common user do not interact with, something a common user cannot control? Yes or no? Does it make any sense? Give me a quick confirmation. I will tell you what single threaded means. I will give you a proper definition. Don't worry about it. Quickly. Am I clear until now? I hope this makes sense. Everyone, please type yes right now in the chat. Very good. Moving a little bit forward. Now, every programming language, whenever we talk about a programming language, there are some basic concepts. Number one is called variables, right? Number two is the data types. So these two are the most important prerequisites before we start our backend development. Okay. Now, when we say variables, what is the agenda? Okay, why do we need variables? Let me give a very simple idea over here. Let's suppose I am trying to build a website. Over here, by default, there is some heading. Let's suppose some text on my website, it's some heading. Then I have a button over there, and that button says change. Now, the logic that I have included in this website is that me as a user, whenever I will click on this, this heading text will be changed into variable verse, right? Variable verse. What does that mean? That means in order to implement this logic, I somehow have to write my code in a way so that I will tell it whatever this element of my website is, please store it somewhere first. Then once you have stored, then go inside that memory location, update its content with this. Is that what I will do? It means to perform a logic on my website, I must make sure my entities, my things are properly stored somewhere in the memory. And for memory, we need small containers. And that's what we mean by variables. So variables are nothing, but this is my memory in which I need small containers in which I will simply store my data. Let's suppose the data that I have stored is 10. Over here, I have stored 12. Over here, I have stored true. Over here, I have stored maybe my name, which is Adfar. Now the question is, as a developer, how am I going to access this memory slot? I am going to access this memory slot only under one condition: when this memory slot have an identifier, have a name. So I will provide an identifier this memory slot and then access the identifier so that I will be able to access the data. That's what we mean by variables in coding. And in my JavaScript, there are three keywords that we actually use to define a proper variable. What are those three keywords? Quickly tell me in the chat. In JavaScript, in order to define a variable, what are those three keywords? Number one is we use var, very good. We use let keyword, we use constant. Now, there are few students over here that are first time looking at web development. So for all of those students, let me try to make it a little bit easy. So let's create a new folder here. Let me name that backend. Somehow I'm not sure what's happening. So I'm not able to create a new folder. What's happening? Okay, let's make it work like this. Unfortunately, some issues are happening. Something is being on automatically typed here. So let me create a file and give it a name. Nothing. I'm not able to do anything. What's happening? It's opening settings. Okay, what's happening? I'm typing I don't know what's happening. I'm not able to write anything here. Why is that? Does anyone have any solution? Like I am trying to create a file. Okay, it's opening settings. Come on, don't do this right now. There are some bugs that are happening in my laptop. Okay. So let me do one thing here. If this does not work like this, so let me try to show more options. Open this with code. And over here inside this, let me go to index.js. I don't know what's happening. Maybe restart. No, I don't think there are some issues. My keyboard is not working. What's happening? What is happening? I don't want to. Allow me a second. Okay, allow me a second. Let me try to shift to my another laptop. Give me a second only, okay? In the meantime, please let me know in the chat what is the difference between var, let, and constant. And let me try to go live from my other screen. There are some bugs in my Windows system, so I'm going to start taking class from my Mac. So allow me a minute only. So I'm going to shift to another screen now, okay? Allow me a minute, guys. Allow me a minute, okay? Hey guys, am I audible? Hello, hi everyone. Am I audible? I think I should be audible, right? Var allows redeclaration, redefine variable. No, that's one kind of a difference, but there is a difference from the perspective of scope as well, right? So there is a difference, right? So I think I am audible, and what I will do is I will open the VS Code and let's try to code. Let's try to understand these basic, right? So everything should be working properly. Perfect, great, okay. So my VS Code is visible. Just allow me a second only, and then we can properly start. Okay. Allow me a second only. Unfortunately, there are some issues with my Windows. Perfect. I guess it's working. So let's do one thing. Let me try to go over here and create a new folder. First of all the new students, make sure that in order to write any code, we need a place where we can write the code, right? And that is your Visual Studio Code. So please and please go there, and install your Visual Studio Code properly so that you can actually write your code. And when we talk about JavaScript, in order to execute JavaScript inside your Windows or inside your local setup, you need a software called as Node.js. So please make sure you install that. I will share the links later on in the WhatsApp group. Okay. So let me go over here and create a new file in the same folder. So let me go and create a new file with the name of index.js. Now see, we have three types, three variations with help of which what we can do is we can actually define a variable. Number one is we can use var keyword. So the syntax is very simple. We define a keyword, write the identifier. Now, when we say identifier, what does it actually mean? Identifier simply means the identifier for that memory slot. So let me simply go and say var a is equals to 10. Done. Similarly, I can use another keyword, let b is equals to 20. Similarly, I can use another keyword which is called constant. I will simply say constant c is equals to 30. So these are the three variables that I have defined for the first variable. A is the identifier for the second variable. B is the identifier for third variable. C is the identifier. It simply means that in the memory slot, three memory slots got created with three identifiers, A, B, and C. Now, if I want to access them inside JavaScript, if you want to print anything, we will use console.log. For example, I want to print my name, so I will simply say Adfar. And if I try to execute this, we should be able to see Adfar in the terminal. Similarly, I want to access any memory slot. How can I do that? I will simply go over here and write that memory slot's identifier name. So I will simply say A. And in this case, if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it's 10. So similarly, I can go and simply can write over there B as well, and then finally I can access my C as well, like this. The question is not, I'm not trying to teach you what variables are, you already know most of it, but we need to understand at this point of time small difference between var, let, and constant. If we can define a variable with var keyword, why do we use let, why do we use constant? There are two ways to understand it. Number one is from the perspective of scope. Now, what does scope mean? Let's suppose I have defined a variable A over here. Scope of a variable simply says, inside this whole domain, where can you access this variable? And where can you not access this variable? Let's suppose instead of accessing our consoles directly, I will define a block. Okay. Now, in this block of code, which is created by a curly brace, can I access my A? The answer is, of course, yes. Similarly, can I access my B? The answer is yes. Similarly, can I access my C? Of course. It does not matter whether it's a let, var, or constant. The reason is because over here, if you look at this particular block, it is one hierarchy inside, but my variables are defined in the global scope, in my main scope, the main file where I can write my code. So from here, if you define any variable with any keyword, it can be accessed anywhere. But the real question is, what will happen if I try to define my variables in the block and then try to access my variables outside of block? Now, this is something very interesting. I have defined a variable A in which I have stored 10, B, and C. And I am trying to access A, I am trying to access B, I am trying to access C. Now look at the output. This is something very interesting for all the new students. If I try to execute this, it says B is not defined. It says B is not defined over here. But the most important thing is that it gives me 10 in the output. And you can understand the first definition of JavaScript. Right now, the first line of code, when I tried to console it, there was no error. Second line of code, there was an error. And if there is error inside the code and it is still executing my code until then, we say such languages are called interpreted programming language. What are they called? Interpreted programming language. Now, JavaScript is a synchronous single-threaded interpreted programming language. What does that mean? That means when the JavaScript engine tries to execute JavaScript code from the code file, it will always execute line by line. It's not going to execute the whole code as bulk. No, it will try to execute it line by line. So first it will execute this from top to bottom, then it will execute this printed properly, then it will execute this printed properly, then it will execute this. But if there is any error anywhere in that particular case, until then, whatever my code was, it's going to execute it. This is what we mean by single threaded interpret language, which is from top to bottom, one line of code once, and then moving forward accordingly. Now I have a simple question. Very simple question here. Can this line of code be executed without this being executed? Quickly. And please make sure you like this video right now. Can we say that? According to the definition of JavaScript, can this line of code be executed without this being executed? The answer is very good. No, it cannot. According to the definition of JavaScript, which is single-threaded synchronous. Synchronous means there are two types of programming language. Always remember. Number one is called synchronous. Another one is called asynchronous. If anyone asks you, hey, is JavaScript synchronous or asynchronous? What will be the answer? What will be the answer? The answer will be JavaScript is a synchronous language. Although there's part of a JavaScript which is asynchronous, which we will discuss in today's class itself. Okay, it's synchronous. Always remember, JavaScript purely on its own is a synchronous language. Okay. Now, if you look at the discussion that we were doing, when I defined a variable with a var keyword inside this block, I was able to access the variable outside of the block as well. It means the variable defined by var keyword, it is still alive outside of the block. But if I talk about this let variable, as soon as this block is completed, my let variable died. I am not able to access it outside of it. That is why we say the let and constant keyword, they are block scoped. That if they are defined in a block, you cannot access them outside of the block. Does this make sense? If a variable is defined with a let keyword and the constant, they die as soon as the block is closed. So whatever their current scope is, over there only you can access them, not outside of that scope, related to let and constant. Another difference over here. If I talk about a variable with a var keyword a, let's suppose I will define 10 over here. So what this identifier holds? 10. And let me try to access the variable a. In this case, if I try to execute this, you can clearly see the output is over here 10. Perfectly fine. After that, if I go here, let me define the same identifier with different data. The question is this allowed inside my JavaScript? Is this allowed? If an identifier is defined using var and then there's already data initialized in it, can we redeclare the same identifier with new data? Can we do that? The answer is, if the variable is defined with a var keyword, of course we can do it. So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it is 10 in this particular case, and then it's adfer. Now, what if I talk about let keyword? If I have defined an identifier with a let keyword, and then I try to redeclare it, is this allowed? The answer is, of course, not. You cannot redeclare the same identifier if the variable declaration is with help of let. It cannot. Third thing, what if I will use constant? Again, similar thing. I cannot actually use constant for redeclaring the same identifier. So the difference is var allows me redeclaration, but let and constant does not. Another difference. Moving forward, if the variable is defined like a, always remember that when I define a variable like this, for us in a single line, I have defined a variable. So var a is equals to 10. But how does JavaScript engine understand this? JavaScript engine understands it. It simply breaks it. Var a, then initialize it in the another block of code like this. So for me, I have done it in a single line. But for JavaScript, it will actually initialize it first. This is called declaring a variable, then initializing it, right? This is how JavaScript will make it over here. But the real question is, what will happen if later on I try to reinitialize my variable? If the variable is defined with a var keyword. So I am not redeclaring the same variable. I am reinitializing the same variable. There's a difference. If I do var a, it means I am creating a new variable with the same identifier. But if I do a is equals to alpha, it means it's the same variable, but I am reinitializing it. So is this allowed inside my var? The answer is yes. Reinitialization is allowed in var. Similarly, if I do let, I have defined a let keyword over it. Let a is equals 10. Can I reinitialize it? Even in let, reinitialization is absolutely possible. But if I talk about constant keyword, what does constant mathematically mean? Constant means that will be same throughout the time. So in this particular case, if I try to execute this, it gives me an error. So var and let can be reinitialized, but constant cannot be. Let and constant cannot be redeclared, but var can be. I hope this difference is also clear. To all the new students, I want you to type in the chat. Does this make sense, guys? All the new students. Or are you able to find this a little bit difficult? Done? Perfect. Very good. Moving a little bit forward. Now, another very important point. Over here, what are the different data types that we have inside our JavaScript? Data types simply mean what type of data we can store and use inside our web application. Okay. The answer is known to every single person who even does not know programming. When you go on a website, you submit sign up forms, feedback forms. What kind of data you deal with? You give your date of birth, you give your email address, you give your name, you give your gender, and so on and so forth. So all that data there must be a way so that we can actually handle that data inside our databases, right? So we have two types of data inside our JavaScript. Number one is called primitive data types. Number two is called non-primitive data types. So we have two types of data inside our JavaScript. Number one is called primitive. Number two is called non-primitive. In primitive, we have 5 to 6 types. Number one is called a number. Number two is called Boolean. Number three is called strings. Number four is called undefined. Number five is called null. And number six is called big integer. In non-primitive, we have our arrays, we have our functions, we have our objects. So these are the data types inside our JavaScript. Before I talk about this primitive data types or non-primitive data types, there's one very important point that you need to understand. There are two types of programming language always. Please note this down. Number one is called static typed languages. Static typed languages. Another one is called dynamic typed languages. Okay, so we have two types of languages: static typed languages and dynamic typed languages. What does static typed mean? What does dynamic typed mean? Some of you know Java, some of you know C, right? C++. Whenever you actually try to create any variable and try to store data in it, you tell them first what kind of data I am going to store in it. So I define int a is equals to 10, something like this, right? Or maybe I simply say float b is equals to 10.4. Now in this a, I must store an integer type only. In this b, I must store a float type only. Yes or no? Can I do something like this? Int a is equals to b. Will that work? Or can I say int a is equals to 10.9? Is that going to work? The answer is no. So when we define a variable, we must tell them that this kind of data we have to store. On the other hand, when we talk about dynamic typed language, we simply define our variable. We don't let them know that, hey, this is the data type this variable will hold. And JavaScript is a dynamic typed language. So when we try to create any variable, we will not actually let it know. We don't have to tell it that, hey, you have to store integer in it. You have to store float in it. You have to store string in it. No, we just store it. It automatically comes to know that what this type of data is. Now let's go here and let's talk about our primitive data types. As I said, there are 5 primitive data types. Number one is called a number. So we will simply define a variable where a is equals to 10 like this. I will store where b is equals to 90.9. Now, did I tell it over here that, hey, please store it as a float? No, it automatically gets to know that. Python is also a dynamic typed language. Now, both of this a comma b, they both belong to one primitive type of data. It's called numbers. Now, if you have to find the data type of any variable, we use operator called as type of. So we will simply say type of a. And if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it gives me number. If I try to search type of b, in this particular case, you can clearly see it gives me number. So for JavaScript, it's not a float, it's not a decimal, it's a number data type. Similarly, this is a number data type. I hope this also makes sense, right? Moving a little bit forward over here. Now, another type of data that we have is, let's say, where c is equals to true. There are cases inside your programming where you have to represent your data either as true or false, as 1 or 0. For example, are you a male? True or false, right? Or for example, are you old enough to vote? True or false? Or does this email exist inside the database? True or false? Right? So we have to make sure that there is a data structure with help of which we are able to properly handle such cases. What's a data structure, by the way? What's a data structure? Data structures are nothing but making sure our data is stored properly inside the memory efficiently so that we can access it and manipulate the data in a efficient manner. For that, we learn data structures, and Boolean is one of the data structure. It can be true. In this particular case, if I try to say console.log C and try to execute this, you can clearly see it's true. What if I will simply tell it print me the type of C? What is the data type of C? In this case, if I try to execute, it's a Boolean. I hope this is also clear. Moving a little bit forward, I can define another variable where D is equals to. Now see, third primitive data type is strings. What do we mean by strings? Strings are those type of data that we simply wrap in double quotes or single quotes. Exactly, flag. Very good, cellulite. Flag is a boolean. So strings are that type of data structure that we simply want to store inside our memory, in which we can have variation, a range of data. For example, my name, for example, my email, for example, my password. Now it can be combination of anything. It's not necessary it's simply a number. It can be combination of anything. So array of characters or collection of characters is called a string. Now, if you ask me, my definition is whatever you wrap inside double quotes or single quotes is known as array. If I want to store my name, I will simply go say adfar. Console.log D over there and execute this. We can clearly see it gives me adfar. But what if I will store 10 in this case? I don't want to store adfar, alphabetic data over there. I want to store 10. Can anyone tell me what is this? Is this an integer or a string? Quickly. What is it? Is it a string or a number? It's a very good. It's a string. Because as I said, whenever you have any kind of data and if it is wrapped with double quotes or single quotes, it's a string, no matter what. Okay. But there's one very important concept in JavaScript which is asked too much in the interviews. Okay. And that is called type coercion. Okay. See, right now I have this data stored 10 is the value of this variable. But don't you think it's very important for us to understand that maybe the user tried to store 10 as a number, but somehow he or she ended up storing it as a string, right? Right? Because it's a value is 10, so it has to be a number, right? That can be a possibility over here. So now I want to perform some operations on it. Now, when we say operations, I mean arithmetic operations. Now, in order to implement arithmetic operations on it, we have to convert this into a number, right? And for that, what is the method we simply use? We can simply go and tell it parse integer. So we can simply use a method called as parse in D and tell me what the output is. So if I try to execute this, you can see it gives me 10. But what if I will try to print type of my this particular operation? In this particular case, if I try to execute this, we can clearly see it's a number. D is not a number, but this operation, this conversion is a number because I have converted it into a number. But the conversion that I did, is the conversion done by JavaScript automatically, or we are using a function? We are using a proper function over here to convert one type of data into another. This kind of conversion is called explicit type conversion. What is it called? Explicit. That we have to explicitly implement a function to convert the number. We are using a function. But on the other hand, when I try to perform an operation on this particular D, it will automatically convert it. For example, I will simply say 20 minus D. Now, can we subtract a number? Sorry, can we subtract a string to a number? Can we do that? Is that allowed? Of course not. It's not a valid operation. We cannot subtract a string. Let's suppose I cannot do 20 minus adfar. I cannot do 20 minus string 10. But we need to understand that when we write this particular code, as a developer, I mean it. I am trying to tell it, please convert this 10 into a numeric 10 and then do the conversion and do the subtraction. So JavaScript will, in this particular case, automatically do the conversion. So over here, the conversion is happening implicitly, which means based on the operation, the data type of one data is being changed over there for the operation that I am doing. And this is called implicit conversion. Default conversion. JavaScript does it on its own. And this concept inside JavaScript is called type coercion. What is it called? Type coercion. A very important concept inside our JavaScript and asked in the interviews as well. I hope this makes sense. Perfectly fine. But what if I do 20 plus D? What is the output of this? What do you think? If I do 20 plus D, what does it mean? Addition. Can we add two strings? The answer is yes. I can add two strings. For example, I will simply go say, please add Adfar plus Rashid. It has a proper meaning, which is Adfar Rashid. It will give me the full name. So yes, in strings, there is a concatenation. So plus has a meaning in strings, which is concatenation. Subtraction is not there possible. So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it gives me 2010. So in this case, this 20 is converted into a string. And it will simply concatenate them. It will simply merge them together. So plus is a valid operation for our strings. I hope this also makes sense. Done. So there are two types of conversions, type coercion and explicit type conversion. Explicit type conversion means when we use any JavaScript functions to convert the data of one data type of one data into another. I hope this makes sense. Moving a little bit forward. So we have discussed number, we have discussed Boolean, we have discussed strings. Another one is undefined. There are a lot of times when we try to define a variable. Let's suppose I will define a variable f and I will not initialize it. Maybe later on in the programming, maybe later on I will initialize it with a value. So I am simply declaring, I am simply occupying a memory slot in the memory, providing it an identifier. In this particular case, if I try to execute console my f and execute this code, you can clearly see the type is undefined. Sorry, the output is undefined. But what is the data type of such variables where initialization is not done? In this particular case, if I execute this, you can clearly see it's undefined. So when you define a variable, and you do not initialize it, in that particular case it is simply undefined. On the other hand, there is a very important keyword which we use called as null. If I try to execute, it will print me object. But before I talk about that, what is the difference between this and this? Like when we will define null and when we will define undefined, the difference is very simple. Whenever we say that it is undefined, in that particular case we can simply say that my intention as a developer is I want to declare the variable, but later on maybe I might put a real value in it. But when I say null, my intention is very simple, that I somehow want to make sure that this particular identifier holds a null only. I don't want this variable later on to be updated with a different value. So that is the difference between undefined and null. Null means I want it to be empty, this identifier. Undefined means at this point of time it's empty, but later on maybe I will put some value in it. I hope this also makes sense. So we have defined our number, boolean, strings, undefined, null. Now it's big int. There are times when we define a variable and we store some big number in it, right? But of course, when we define a variable like this, it is 10, it's 90, maybe 1,000, maybe lakh, something like that, 1 million. The numbers are limited. But if I talk about this particular number, it's a very big number. JavaScript gets a little bit confused, like how I will store this, how I will represent such number. At this point of time, if I simply try to console.log my type of h, of course it is a number over here, so it should give me number. So in this case, if I try to execute this, it will give me a number. But it's a very big number over there. And if I try to directly print it now, you can clearly see the output looks like some exponentials. Although right now not, you can see there is some issue over here. My number is somehow 624, and over here in the output, it gave me 6000. So somehow my JavaScript is not able to identify big integer numbers. Now, whenever you have a very big integer and you want to store it, simply add n at the end. So if you add n at the end, automatically I am telling my JavaScript that this is a very big integer that I want you to store. So in this particular case, if I try to execute this, you can see it's properly represented over there. Not only that, in this case, if I try to go and see type of our edge, you can see if I execute this, it gives me big int. So now the data is not a number, but a very big integer. So JavaScript keeps a very big int data type for it. I hope this makes sense. Am I clear? So how do we represent our data? Primitive data type. Number one. Number two type of data that we actually have is called non-primitive data types. So let me create a file with the name of non-primitive.js. What's the difference between primitive and non-primitive? Can anyone tell me? Like if anyone asks you what is primitive and what's non-primitive, maybe you will tell primitive are number, boolean. No, that's not the definition of primitive. If anyone asks you what's a primitive data type, what are we going to say? Anyone? Please make sure you like this video right now. And please subscribe if you have not already. Non-primitive is user defined. No. Primitive built-in arrays also, there's a proper constructors that we use. Mutable, immutable, what does that mean? Already defined. Okay. Anyone? Derived from the primitive data type, predefined. Non-primitive classes and objects. Okay. Anyone else? See, the difference, if you go to official documentation of MDN as well, over there the definition is very simple. On primitive data types, we do not have methods defined. What does methods mean? For this A10, I do not have methods defined which I can implement on it. Like I cannot use dot push. There's no prototype method for it. There's no pop method for it. Like for arrays which we use. That's what we mean by primitive data types. Although there is, if you might say that no, sir, for strings we do have some methods. There's a different concept for that, which we might see, maybe not. But as of now, the definition of primitive is that there are no default methods that are defined for my primitive. And on the other hand, on non-primitive data types, we have methods defined. There are proper prototypes created for our non-primitive data type, which we do not have in the case of primitive. Okay, what does that mean? Let me explain. First of all, in non-primitive, there are three data types that we have. Number one is called arrays. Number two is called objects. Number three is called functions. Okay. What do we mean by arrays? Let's suppose the requirement is I want to store my data, maybe marks of my 10 subjects. So I'm appearing in one of the exams and I got my result. I want to store marks of 10 subjects. So what is the first way? I will simply say subject 1 marks is 40 out of 50. Similarly, S2 is this. Similarly, S3 is something like this, so on and so forth. Which means I will create 10 variables. But in this particular case, it's very important for us to understand all those 10 variables will be created at different locations inside my memory, so they are not connected to each other, right? I cannot reach to 60 with help of S1, with help of this 40 variable. I cannot do that. That's why it's very important for me that somehow I should have a data structure in which I can store collection of data consecutively inside my memory. And for that particular reason, we have variables, sorry, we have a data structure called as arrays. Okay, does it make any sense? We have arrays. Now the same data can be represented as, I will simply say, where marks is equals to, in order to define a consecutive data, I will use square brackets. Then I will simply say 40 comma 60 comma 80 comma 100 comma, let's suppose 50 comma 60 comma 90, something like this. So what I have done is I have simply created a single identifier, a single slot inside my memory, and then I am telling it in that slot store 40, and then consecutively on the alt, on the what is this called? The consecutive memory locations. Please store 60, then 80, then 100, then 50, then 60, then 70. So they are consecutively stored at one memory location, in a contiguous memory location. Exactly. And it's very easy for me to now store, instead of storing those data at multiple locations in multiple variables, I will store them in a single variable that I actually have. Let me try to search if I have a whiteboard installed. Unfortunately, I don't have that. So can I install whiteboard here? No. So let me do that later on. Okay, let's come back. So we have our arrays like this. So what does it mean? It simply means inside my memory, let's suppose there's some memory that I have created, okay? And in that memory, where this marks is stored, let's suppose for that, the marks, where it is stored, its memory address is A, okay? Now, if this 40 takes 2 bytes of memory, can you tell me where this will be located if this is stored at A? If this 40 is stored at the memory address A inside my memory, can you tell me where 60 will be stored, knowing that these all individual items take 2 bytes of memory? So of course it means that 60 will be stored at A plus 2. It or automatically means that my 80 will be stored at where A plus 4. Similarly, it means 100 will be stored at A plus 6, and so on and so forth, right? So we have our 40 stored at the base address. In this case, A is called base address. So it's A. 60 will be stored at a plus 2, 80 will be stored at a plus 4, and 100 will be stored at a plus 6, then a plus 8, then a plus 10, then a plus 12, so on and so forth, depending on how many elements we have. But can we also say, let's suppose all of those elements are taking n, so n is 2. So this 2 that I have, it's n, so every single item is taking 2 bytes of memory. So can we say this 40 is stored at a plus 0n? Can we say this 60 is stored at a plus n? Can we say 80 is stored at a plus 2n? Can we say 100 is stored at a plus 3n? Is that correct? Right? So can we also say, if you understood this, can we say that this 40 item is 0 index far from the base address? It is 0 steps far from the base address. Similarly, if we have to understand it, we can say this 60 is 1 step far from the base address. So this can be also written as a plus 1n. We can say 80 is 2 steps far from the base address a. We can say this 100 is 3 steps far from the 3 index far from the base address. So it means in order to access these items individually, what we actually do is we use index. So at this point of time, if I simply go say marks and then try to console it, you can clearly see it gives me all of the data. But what if I want to access them individually? So how can I access them individually? I can access them individually by their index. Like how far are they from the base address? And that's what we mean by index. So I can simply say marks at the index 3. So this has 0 index, this has 1 index, this has 2 index, this has 3 index. So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it gives me 100. So it means from an array, we can access items using indexing, right? Now, I won't waste too much of time on it because we have already completed a lot of things related to arrays in our front end series. Now, since it is an array and it's a non-primitive data type, there are a lot of methods that we can implement on the arrays. Okay, what are those methods? Those methods, let's try to understand them one by one. Number one is if we treat our array as stack. What does stack mean? Stack means one on top of each other, right? So stack of books. So I have a stack of books. Similarly, I have a stack of money that are one top of each other. Now, if I have a stack of books or stack of money, where from I can add more books to it, I can add more books only from the top of the stack. Similarly, if I have to remove the book from this stack, I will only remove it from the top of the stack. So in this stack, the first book which I placed, this will be the last book that I can take out of the stack, which means first in inside the stack will be the last that I will take out of it. That's why we say it follows first in, last out principle structure. Philo structure over here. And with respect to stack in JavaScript, there are two operations that we can perform. Number one is push, number two is pop. And both of these operations will be performed on my top of the stack, which means at the end of the stack. So we can simply go, hey, var arr is equals to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I want to add more items to it. So what can I do? I will simply say, let's say I will simply go say on air, please implement push method. And I want you to add 5, 6, 7. Now, in this particular case, if I try to execute my ARR, and if I go and execute this, you can clearly see my ARR is updated with these 5 values, then these 3 values. That's what we have. So it's push, right? I have a simple question over here, which I have already taught a lot of students. What if I will store this in a variable? So where x is equals to this. Then if I want to console my x instead of ARR, what will be the output of this? What will be the output of this code? This brings me to a very important topic, which is whenever guys you talk about any method, always make sure you remember two things with respect to that method. Number one is what this method does. Number two is what it returns. Okay. Jerome says 5, 6, 7. it will store array. Okay, if I try to execute this now, you can see it gives me 8. Always remember the push method that I have, it returns the updated length of that array. So whatever that updated length is now for the array after implementing a push on it, that's what it will store. That's why it's very important for us to understand first what it does, but what this whole operation will return. It will return the length of this whole array which it is updating. I hope that makes sense, right? Moving a little bit forward, now another method is on the ARR. I will implement pop. Now, what does pop do? Pop simply removes the single item from that array. So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see now my array only holds 1, 2, 3, 4. It has popped the 5, right? Now, similarly, what does pop return? So it returns the element it removes. So if I try to print it and if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it gives me 5. So pop returns the element which it removes from the array. I hope this makes sense. Now, these are basic methods. Since we have already covered them in the front end series, I would suggest you to go there. But I am here. I am going to teach you two topics, two methods on arrays. Okay. Actually, three methods on arrays. What they does. See, before we talk about arrays, we need to understand what functions are. Those methods, what functions are. Everyone over here, definitely in your 10th or in your 12th, in your matric, you might have learned something related to mathematics called as functions, right? Like for example, like this, f of x, it is equals to x square plus 2, right? Maybe this is the function that I'm trying to create in the mathematics. Leave programming aside for a second. I'm trying to make you understand what functions are in programming. Now, if I try to say f of 4, can you guys tell me what will be the output of this code? F of 4, simply it means I am trying to give 4 to this function as an input. So 4 square is 16 plus 2 is 18. So it will print 18 in the output. Similarly, if I go and pass 5 as an input, it will give me 27. So what does this mean? It simply means I have actually created my boilerplate of my function only once. My function definition has happened. Now, whenever I need such requirement inside my mathematics, I am simply calling the same function with the name and passing different inputs, and it gives me the output. Similarly, inside my code, we have the same concept called as functions. The functions serve only one purpose, which is that it will make sure that we will define a block of code based on our requirement. Once that block of code is defined, it won't do anything on its own unless and until I don't call this particular definition with the input so that it can yield me the output. Let's talk about an example. I will define a function. The syntax is very simple. I will use function keyword. Then whatever the function name is, I will simply say add. Or let me define the same function, which is f. And then over here, I will simply tell it do something. Now, this function is definitely going to receive some inputs, although not necessarily, but let me pass some input to it. How do we do that? We pass some parameters over here in this bracket. So we will simply say the input to this function is x. Okay. And after that, I simply wanted to print console.log. I wanted to simply square this x and then plus 2 to the output. But if I try to execute this code, now you can see that in the output, there's no output. There's nothing. Although I have console. Why is there no output? Because functions on their own are just a blueprint of something or just a block of code. And they won't do anything unless and until we don't call them and pass the desired input for which we want it to perform the operation. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So we have to call it. We must invoke it. So I will simply go with its name. So I will simply call my f function and please pass 4 to it as an input. So in this case, if I try to execute this, this 4 will be mapped to x. It will be passed over here. 4 square is 16 plus 2, 18. So if I try to execute this, although it says it's not okay because I highlighted that. So if I execute this, it gives me 0. Now why does it give me 0? I guess this is not a valid operation, right? X square is not a valid operation. Let me try to remove this for a second. If I go, although yes, it is, if I'm not wrong, it is star star, star star 2, right? Star star, 2 stars for power. So if I try to execute, it's 18. It's 2 stars, not this one. So whenever you have to check the square, sorry, power, in that particular case, we will write 2 stars and it gives me 18. Now, if I want to execute it again and again, it's completely up to me. I will pass different input as well. 45 over here, let's say 33, let's say over here 21, let's say over here it is 12 or whatever the input says. So if I try to execute this, it will properly every single time go to the function definition, pass this input, and then evaluate it and give me the output. Does it make any sense? Am I clear? Am I clear? What functions are? Simply a block of code. Definition is created only once. Then whenever you need same block of code to execute again and again, you will simply call it. Now over here, I have passed only one input. I have defined one parameter. Can we define multiple parameters? The answer is yes. Even I can go say x, y. Then I can also say z. So how many inputs I want to pass to this function? It's completely up to me. Similarly, I will simply go x plus y plus z. This is what I want to do, whatever, right? So I will have to pass 3 inputs in a similar way. So x, 5, 6, then 45, 6, 5. And let me try to remove these. And if I try to execute this, they are going to properly execute and give me the output, whatever the output is, right? Now the real question is it necessary that we always have to pass input to a function? The answer is no. I can simply define a function which simply prints me a normal string. So name of the function is greet and it simply consoles hello. It means that whenever I will call this greet function in any time inside my program, the output, the desired, the requirement is I want it to console hello only, nothing else. So it will give me hello. So even if I try to call it 100 times, it is going to every single time call it and result console hello in the output only. Right? Now I have a simple question. Okay. Not question, but this is one very important thing that I want to teach you here. Number one, that when we talk about function, how does it work? Although there are 3 classes that I have given on functions in this MERN August playlist. You can go to the YouTube, okay? The title of those 3 lectures is JavaScript Under the Hood. Please go and check those 3 videos. Okay? Please go and check those 3 videos. JavaScript Under the Hood, part 1, part 2, part 3. You will properly understand how JavaScript engine executes its code, what is the execution context, everything there. I have properly opened the entire JavaScript in front of you. So please watch those 3 videos if you have time. When we talk about functions, there are 2 things related to it. As I said earlier, when we talked about push method over there, I told you what will be the output of X, right? I told you, you always need to make sure that there are 2 things associated with a function. Number 1 is what it does. Number 2 is what it returns. These are 2 different statements. Number 1 is what it does. Number 2 is what it returns. Let's try to understand when we say what does it return, what does it mean? Let's suppose over here I have a code called as console.log adfar, right? Then I have a code which is console.log 20 plus 30. And then I am simply calling this greet 2 times only. So every single person, especially those students who are new, who are learning web development first time, can you guys tell me what will be the output of this code if I execute it? You need my WhatsApp number? I think I can share because allow me a second. Let me share it. But I'm not able to type now. So I will share it in the at the end. Please remind me at the end, Kamran. Okay. Somehow I'm not able to type on my Windows. My keyboard is not working. What will be the output of this code? Praveen says undefined. Why will be it undefined? So in this case, it will print first of all adfar, then this, then this, then right. See, what's happened. What happens? Since we know JavaScript is a single threaded synchronous programming language, okay, it means execution will happen line by line, one line at a one time, single thread at one time, and then it will move from top to bottom, which means it's going to execute this. As soon as it completed executed this, it will print adfar in the output. Very good. Then it will execute this as well. It will print 50. Then it will simply ignore it since it's a function and functions do not work on their own, right? Now over here, finally after that, it's going to execute this. Now when I invoke this function, what does it mean? It simply means I am JavaScript engine. I am trying to tell JavaScript engine, go inside the function definition and go and execute the code that is inside the function over here. Which means when I execute this, when I call this, the control of JavaScript engine will be here, exactly here. Now, when the JavaScript engine executors control will be here, it will print hello. But don't you think then it has to take the control of the engine out back where from the invocation happened so that it can execute this line of code as well? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? When the first greet was called, it will go inside this function, control will be here, and it will execute the code that is all inside the function. But it's very important for us to understand then the control should go back to the global scope so that the rest of the code can be executed. Yes or no? Yes or no? And for that, every function has a return statement. So we use a return keyword. Return means wherever from this function received the control, please send the control back to that. But I can return not just a empty return, but I can return a value as well. I can simply return, hey, execution completed, or whatever I want to return, execution, something like this. So return execution completed. Now, why is this return there? Only for one reason, so that the control can be given back to where from it was invoked, so that rest of the code will be executed, right? So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see the output is adfar 50 hello hello. Do you see anywhere execution completed here? Do you see anywhere in the console? No. Why? Because return statement simply means that return the control back where it came from. Okay. But you will say, sir, no, even if I don't keep this return here, even at that point of time, control goes to another greet and it still executes it. The reason for that is you need to understand that even if you don't mention return over there, every function by default returns undefined. It will return undefined. If you don't specifically explicitly mention anything, it will implicitly return undefined over here. Am I clear? Am I clear? Does it make any sense? Right now, let's suppose I have returned exactly what it was. I have returned my name, which is Adfar, with a lot of r's. Now I want to print this as well. So whenever you want to see what the function returns, if you want to see what the function returns, you want to console that, store the invocation of that function in a variable. So I can simply say var a is equals to greet. Then if I go here and try to console.log a, you can clearly see as soon as I execute this, we will be able to see adfar there with a lot of r's. So if you want to see what your function returns, store the invocation of that function in the a. Function will be returned, executed. But whatever it returns, it will be also stored in a variable, right? But what if I will not return anything over here? In that particular case, if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it prints undefined, which means it had returned undefined over here. Am I clear? Am I clear? I need a quick confirmation before I move forward. I need a quick confirmation before I move forward. Every single student must reply in the chat. Is there any student in the class who is learning all of this first time? Yes, we will take a break now. Please type first in the chat. Please type first in the chat. All the students who are learning it first time. First. first. So all these people who are typing first in the chat, are we able to understand these things? Like, does it make any sense? Even if you don't know JavaScript, but you know a little bit of programming, does this make sense? All these perfect. I guess it makes sense, right? Perfect. So I think we can take a break now, break of 10 minutes, and followed that, we are going to start the another part of our prerequisites, which will be the two functions of arrays, very important functions of arrays. And then we will also make sure that we will discuss asynchronous JavaScript. So these are the two more prerequisites for our backend, which we will discuss after the break. And after that, I will also share the attendance link which you are supposed to submit, Nikhil. And then I will be able to track your attendance. Okay. So let's take a 10 minutes break. In the meantime, please refresh and come back fresh. Okay. See you guys exactly after 10 minutes. Objects are not all, we will also discuss objects because objects are very important. We will also discuss that as Jero. Okay. Perfect. See you guys after 10 minutes. Hey guys, hi everyone, welcome back. I hope I'm audible as well as visible. Am I? Hey guys, hi everyone. Hello, hi. Hi Said, hi everyone. Perfect. I can see people are joining. So as of now, there are 50 students here. So let's wait 1 or 2 minutes. In the meantime, we have understood few very basic prerequisites of our JavaScript backend, which we are going to start from tomorrow, hopefully. And if there are some other topics that you would want me to discuss before we start backend, please do text me on my WhatsApp so that we can plan our next lecture accordingly. Okay. So I think we can start. See, we have understood what our functions are, block of a code, and we create that block of code for our requirement. And then whenever I need anything related to it, I will simply call it. Let me give you a very simple example of, like, you might say, like, give me an example, real example of where I will need function. Maybe in my front end, there is a button. Now, whenever I click on that button, it should simply give me an alert saying, please, or saying simply welcome. Now, don't you think that when I click on button, I will simply ask it, hey, please call a function in which I'm simply creating an alert of welcome. So logic is written only once. Then whenever I click on a button, it's calling that function again and again. So functional programming is something very important for our web development. Okay. Now there's one very important concept of functions before we move towards the arrays, and that particular concept is called callback functions. Okay. Now, what do we mean by callback functions? Let's try to understand that. Let's suppose there's a function that I have, okay, and this function name is, let's suppose, greet or whatever, and over there I have passed a argument called as x. Now, in this case, I am also passing another argument, let's suppose y. Now, what I am doing is I'm simply calling my x, then I'm simply saying console.log y. Now, according to this particular structure that I have defined over there, can you guys tell me, when I call this particular function greet, what is the value of x that this greet is expecting? Do you think this x will be a number, a string, an object, an array, or a function? What do you think? So when I call this greet function, I will pass its values, x values, y value. So what are the possible values of x over here? Very good. In this case, if you look at it, it is, I am calling this, x. It means x is supposed to be a function. So maybe I will simply go define a function over there. Let's suppose it is simply, hello, right? Something like this. And what it does is it simply console.log good morning. Okay. Now there are two functions that I have here. If you look at this code, number one is greet, number two is hello, and I am calling only greet. Then I am passing this hello as one argument. Then I am passing y simply as adfer over here. Now y is a normal string, and we have seen few examples where we pass strings as an argument. Okay, but if I pass this, which is a function, as an argument, is this going to work? The answer is, of course, yes. So you can clearly see hello is the name of the function. I am passing it to this greet. So x becomes hello. I am calling it. So hello is being called inside greet. So if I execute this particular code, you can clearly see it prints good morning because x is the first line here. Then it gives me alpha. Now, can I say that a function is being passed as an argument to another function? And such functions are called callback functions. A callback function is a function inside JavaScript which is being passed as an argument to another function. Am I clear? Tomorrow, Adil will start backend. Tomorrow. So, callback function is that function which is passed as an argument to another function. So hello is the callback function, not greet. Greet is a normal function. But hello is a callback function because I am passing this hello as an argument to another function. I hope this makes sense. Now the function which receives another function as an argument is called a higher order function. So this is a higher order function. A function that receives another function as an argument or returns a function. In that case, it's called a higher order function. So quickly tell me over there, in this whole structure, greet and hello, which function is a callback function? Is it greet or hello? Every single student, please type that in the chat. Which function is a callback function? It is hello. Hello is the callback function. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now I can also do one thing. I can simply call this greet again. Now instead of calling hello over there, I can define my function directly like this. So I can simply go define a function like this, in which I will simply say console.log. I will simply say variable verse. And then second argument over here to greet is simply bellow or whatever, right? So you can clearly see, according to this particular code that I have, in my first greet invocation, hello was the callback function. But in second greet, this function is the callback function. Since it's a function, so it will still be called as a callback function. And we can define our function definition directly over here. So in JavaScript, even as an argument, you can pass a function. Now this function will be treated and mapped to the x becomes this function. It will print console.log, and then bellow is y, and it executes it. So if I try to execute it properly, works over there, prints variable verse and bellow. I hope this also makes sense. Another very important thing, if you look at this particular function, this function does not have a name. Do you think I have given it a name? No, I have not given it any name over there. Although JavaScript will automatically map it with X, but when I try to define this particular function, this callback function, I have not given it a name. And function without a name is called an anonymous function. What is it called? Anonymous function. It is a callback function, but also an anonymous function. I hope this also makes sense. Moving a little bit forward. Now I started my discussion for arrays. There are two methods that we need to understand. Actually, three. Let's suppose I have an array which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. There are some methods, array elements that I have here. Now the requirement is interviewer has asked you, hey, do one thing, create a new array out of this array that we have, and make sure every item is multiplied by 2. So the new array that you will create out of it, it should be simply 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 18, 16, 18. So 2 should be multiplied to every single item. What is the basic way? The basic way is I will simply go start a loop on it. And in order to start a loop in JavaScript, we have 3 types of loops: for, while, and do while. You can check that on your own. In which I will start the initialization where I is equals to 0. Then I should be less than arr dot length. Then I will simply say I plus plus. Now in this particular loop, let me simply go and say where my arr2, and I will simply initialize it with empty. Then yes. So what have I done? I have started a loop over there in which the logic is very simple, that I am starting my iterator I over there with 0. It will loop until my length of array is satisfied, which is in this case I guess 9. Then I plus plus for every iteration. Now in this case, what is it supposed to do? It's simply supposed to multiply each item by 2 and store in my arr2. That's what we want to do. Yes or no? So what am I going to do? I'm simply going to tell it, in my arr2, please push my arr at the index I for that loop into 2. What does that mean? Let's try to understand this loop. Initially, my I will be 0. Now, is my 0 less than 9? The answer is yes. So this loop will be executed. In my arr2, push will happen. ARR at the 0, which is 1, multiplied by 2. So 2 will be stored here. Then second loop will be starting. I plus plus will happen. I becomes 1. Is 1 less than 9? Yes. So ARR at the 1, which is 2 into 2, 4, 4 will be stored. So if I simply go say console.log my ARR 2, and if I try to execute this, you can clearly see it gives me 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on and so forth. Right? Now we need to understand one very important thing. This type of design is called a declarative design. Yes or no? Declarative design, sorry, imperative design, not declarative design. What does that mean? That means that in order to solve our problem, we actually created everything ourselves. I had to tell it start I with 0, then implement the condition, then implement a loop and push. So every logic was implemented by me properly. So in order to loop on this array, I had to write my proper logic. And when we simply write each and every single bit of logic ourselves, we call that design imperative design. But JavaScript does not support imperative design. Although it supports, I mean, web development does not. Web development says no, use declarative approach. Declarative approach means use a method on this array that will automatically implement a loop and then return whatever you want it to return. Okay, and we have one such method inside our arrays, which is our map method. With help of map method, what is going to happen? It's simply going to loop on its own. So I will simply say var arr2 is equals to, on my arr, the arr that I have, on that please implement a map. Map, what does it do? It starts a loop on this particular array on its own. So it's not like that I will tell it, hey, you have to start loop from 0 index to last index. No, it automatically knows that. It does that on its own. We don't have to worry about it, how it starts the loop, how it does it. No, it does it. Then it receives an argument. Since it's a function, it will receive an argument over here, and that is a function. That's why we say it receives a callback function as an argument. So we will pass function as an argument. Where that function receives two more arguments. Number one is item comma index. Now what does that mean? I will tell you in a second. And finally I will tell you to do something. See what it does. When we implement a map on an array, it means start a loop. Okay, it's a higher order function. Yes, when I implement map, I simply mean implement a map on this array, then execute this function on each individual item one by one, where the each individual item will be mapped to the item index argument here, and its index will be mapped to the index over here. Instead of returning this, I will simply say console.log please console me item. Okay, sorry, let me go here and let me simply say, let me add a string to it. I will simply say item is, then comma, I will simply print item. What does that mean? Let's try to understand what this item means over here. Now, how many times this function will be executed on this array? 9 times, because 9 is the length of the array. So 9 times the loop will be executed. So if I try to execute it over here, you can clearly see it actually gives me item is 1, item is 2, item is 3, item is 4, all these items. Which means that when we implement map over there, the function which is passed as an argument, the first argument is nothing but in first loop it will be 1, in second loop it will be 2, in third loop it will be 3, and so on and so forth. So a loop starts in which it automatically takes these items one by one and maps them with this argument of the callback function. Now what is the index? If I go and say index, so I will simply say index is. What is the second argument? If I try to execute this, you can simply see, although because I highlighted in, now if I try to execute, you can see index is 0. So on each loop, whatever the index of those individual items are, it maps them on the index. So, and always remember, we will perform a logic, whatever that is, we'll simply say return my item into 2. Okay, I will talk about that, yes, one. Over here, let's try to understand what happens. Always remember, map will simply take this function, execute it one by one on each individual item. Done. But this whole function will return something, because I told you always remember two things. Number one is what it does. Number two is what it returns. Always remember, map returns an array. So this ARR2 will be an array. But what? Let's try to understand that. First loop will start. My item will be 1, index will be 0. And I am telling it return item into 2, which is 1 into 2. So 2 will be stored as the first element of ARR. Second loop will start. Item becomes 2. It will simply return 2 into 2 and stored here. That's why I said map returns an array. That's why if I simply go say console.log ARR2, you can clearly see if I execute this, we can see the array. Now, if you tell me, guys, do you think this method is easier or this method is easier? Of course, this method is easier because you don't have to worry about from where I have to start the loop up till what is the end. You don't have to worry about that. Am I clear? Does it make any sense? Do we understand what map is? Give me a quick confirmation in the chat. Quick confirmation. Then we will discuss one other method. Similarly, let me give a simple question over there. What if I will simply tell it, instead of returning item into 2, please return item greater than 5. What does that mean? What will be the output of this code if I execute it? Item greater than 5. Cellulite says 6, 7, 8, 9. Very good. Anyone else? What will be the output of this code? Six, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Anyone else? Now, there's one thing related to map that you need to understand. Whenever we implement map on any array, the resultant array that we have, it will always be of the same length that my array is on which I am implementing map. So whatever operation we perform over here, it is never going to reduce the length of the original array. Understood? So if this length is 9, over here ARR2 will be always 9. Now, I am not telling it over here filter out. No, I am telling it to create a new array that satisfies this particular condition. That is why if I try to execute this, you will see first 5 does not satisfy it. That's why they are false, 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 false. And then true, 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 true. So map will always be the same length array. It will never ever reduce the length of an array of the original array. So ARR2 will always be the same array, same length array that we have. I hope that also makes sense. Now, another thing is, what if our requirement is not this? Our requirement is actually we want it to return 6, 7, 8, 9 in this case, if this is the condition. We want to make sure that I want to filter out the array based on a condition. Maybe I want it to return even numbers only. I want it to return on, or I want it to create an array of odd numbers only. Or I wanted to create an array where only a specific condition is matched and it returns me the elements directly instead of true false. For that, we have another method called as filter. The logic is same, rest of the logic is same. It will also start the loop on its own, take these elements, place them one by one into item, their index over here, and then execute it. But it will filter out. This has the capability of filtering out an array. Now, in this particular case, if I try to execute this, we can clearly see it gives me 6, 7, 8, 9. Why? Because now I am filtering out the array. Now, these two methods are very important related to our arrays. I hope this makes sense. Am I clear? Am I clear? And trust me, these methods you might use very often in your backend as well. Not only that, in your front end React as well, in your DOM as well. So related to arrays, since collection of data is something that web development takes very seriously, we represent our data in the database as arrays. Later on, we will see that. So arrays are the most important topic. If you want to become a very good front-end developer, if you want to become a very good web developer, there are three concepts inside your array, JavaScript, which you should definitely be master of. Number one is your arrays. Number two is functions. Number three is objects. I mean object-oriented programming, prototypes, new keyword, all those things. So these are very important things. Okay, moving a little bit forward. Now, another very important method is, I'm not going to talk about now. These are called looping methods. Okay. Now, what if I want to create a method? I want it to return an array where it will simply remove these 3 items and add more items over here. How can I do that? If we talk about our imperative design, we have to start a loop, then we have to think of a proper algorithm and implement it. But whenever you want to make any manipulations in an array, you want to remove items, you have that method. You want to remove items and add new items, you have that method. It's called splice. Splice is the method with the help of which we can do it. So I can simply say on my ARR, please implement a splice method. Then it receives, at this point of time, we will talk about two arguments. Number one is at which index you want it to remove items. Number two is how many items you want it to remove. So number one is the index of the array, index of that element, where you want it to start removing the number of elements. Second is not the index, but the quantity, how many you want to remove. Let's suppose I want it to remove only one item. So now if I try to execute this ARR, you can clearly see I am telling it at index 3, which is this 4. Please remove one element. So if I try to execute this, you can clearly see 4 is removed. Now if I go here and tell it remove 3, it means start from 4, remove 3 elements. 4, 5, 6 will be removed. If I try to execute, you can clearly see 4, 5, 6 is removed. Done. So this is start index. This is how many elements we want it to remove. I hope that makes sense. Now let's suppose I don't want to just remove the elements, but I also want to add in those items. I want to replace this. So 4, 5, 6 should be replaced by XYZ strings. Can we do that? The answer is yes. After that, simply put the elements which you want to add. So I will simply say X, then Y, then over here Z, then over here, let's suppose A. It simply means at index 3, remove 3 items. At index 3, add these items. It means at index 3, remove 3 items. At index 3, add these items. If I try to execute this particular code, you can clearly see at index 3, 4, 5, 6 is removed, but these 4 items got created. Now I have a simple question. I don't want to remove any item. I want to keep the elements there, but I want to add only. Can I do that? Of course, in that case, I will simply say at index 3, please remove no elements and then add these many items. And in this case, if I try to execute this, we can clearly see all the elements are there, but at index 3, these items are added. Now, one very important point, which is the conclusion of this output that I saw. In a lot of programming languages, when we talk about arrays, we say array is a collection of same type of data, which means if I create an array of numbers, it will always hold a numbers only. If we create array of strings, it will always hold strings. But that is case in another programming language. Since we know a JavaScript is a dynamic typed language, we can also create an array with different types. So we can store string, number, boolean, null, and all those things in a same array that we actually have. Am I clear, guys? We can store any type, yes. With this, we have concluded a revision of arrays as well. Now, all those students, there are at least 10 to 15 methods, very important methods on arrays. Please, I request all of you to go and check them, okay? If you have time. If not, then focus on the backend, and definitely we are going to properly understand backend. From tomorrow, I will be a little bit slow. Right now, I am a little bit fast only because of one condition, which is that it's a prerequisite session. I want to start backend as soon as I can. So that is the reason I am a little bit fast. But from tomorrow, we are going to start backend, and I will be very slow, and we will be trying to understand almost everything properly. Now, there are still one very important topic, two topics which are remaining of JavaScript, which we will start tomorrow, okay, in our next session. Number one is objects. Number two is asynchronous JavaScript, in which we have to discuss promises. So these three topics will be discussed in the first half of a session tomorrow, and then in the second half of a session, we will actually start backend. We will start our Node.js, like what Node.js is and how it works. Okay. So give me the feedback of today's session in the comment section, and I will share the attendance link in the meantime. Quickly, give me the feedback, especially those students who are joining first time. I will share the attendance link. Do we have any questions? So let me share the attendance link. Someone is saying your way of teaching is like a drug. Please do not take drugs. You can take my teaching, but let's not use that word. Perfect, great. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this session. And if you really respect the effort, I would request you one thing, which is please, once this session is completed, please put a valuable comment there. Okay, in the video comment section, because all these comments won't be visible. Yaswant is asking, sir, how is how in hierarchy function the first parameter automatically takes its item, second one is at index. As I said, Yaswant, map is a predefined method, right? So when we implement map or filter, it's a predefined method. It's not in higher order function. It is a prototype method for arrays only. So over there, when you call map, there's a proper set of code that map internally executes. So over there, it maps the items individually one by one. So behind the scenes, that's happening. I hope that makes sense, right? Tomorrow, and another thing, yes, thank you so much for reminding me. Tomorrow we will not have our session in the evening. We will have our session in the morning, 10 a.m. to 12, because tomorrow I am traveling in the evening. So I have already shared the link in the chat section for addends. Please and please submit your addends. There's a Google form link which I have pasted in the chat section. Okay, so submit your addends. I will give you a few minutes of time, and perfect, great. So I've shared the link, guys. Please make sure you, yes, I have shared the link in the chat section only. Have I not? Let me try to share it again. I have shared it again now. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. IST. Okay, 10 a.m. IST in the morning, we will have a session. So please, please, please make sure every one of you join on time. Do we have any questions, guys? Perfect. Some M has done a super chat. Thank you so much for that. But I think, okay. Thank you so much, M, whoever you are. Link is not opening. We are sorry. This document is not published. Okay, okay. Allow me a second. Since I have created it few seconds back, and in that case, maybe I might have not given the access to everyone. So allow me a second only. Let me try to do that. So I'm going to publish it to every single. Perfect. It's published right now. So let me try to get the new link of it, and so let me paste it. It should be working now. Splice is a method with help of which we can simply make sure to remove items from an array at any index. So if we want to remove items from an array, we want to simply splice it. Maybe at index 2, I want to remove the items. How many items we want, we can put it as a second argument. Classroom ID is your name, okay, is your full name, your full name that you have. As of now, we are not creating classroom, but as soon as we do that, then you will get your Google Classroom ID. But as of now, it's your name. Jerome, I hope splice makes sense, right? Please make sure that you put a valuable comment after the session is done if you have enjoyed the session. So thank you so much for joining today's session. I hope you have enjoyed this. Classroom ID, as I said, Ram is your name, full name, okay? Is your full name. Like my full name is Adfar Rashid, so you will write Adfar Rashid there. Bye, guys. Good night. See you in the tomorrow's class, 10 a.m. in the morning. Bye. Good night. Good night, everyone. Why is everyone asking classroom ID again and again? It's your full name. Am I audible? You know, Jerome, once you mention first two arguments, number one argument will be at which index you want to do the manipulation. Second is how many you want to delete. After that, how many arguments you will put na, one, two, three, four, how many arguments, whatever their values are, they all will be added at the index. So after that, it's not like how many arguments can I put? You can put n number of arguments. All those arguments will be added at that index, right? Which is most used for backend. What does that mean? Your full name is the classroom ID. Bye, guys. Good night. Good night. Good night. Bye. 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 See you. Bye. Express. We use Express, not Node.js. Adil. Bye. Bye, guys. Bye, everyone. Good night. Bye.